Welcome to the video. In this video we're going to be taking our first look at these things here. These are the AOMWAY Commander 1 goggles. These are the first goggles from AOMWAY, definitely aimed at that kind of professional level of pilot. So we have a lot of the things on these goggles that you expect to see on higher end goggles, things like the Fat Sharks. Now what I'm going to do in this video is first of all we'll talk a little bit about the specs, about what this thing has on it. You'll notice already we have things like diversity, and we'll go through those bits and bobs. We'll talk about what comes in the box. We'll do a quick overview of the features and some of the controls. We'll talk a little bit about how the DVR actually works itself, and then finally I'll talk about what it's like to actually fly with these things. We've had these for coming up to 3 weeks now, and I've had a good chance to get some proper flights on them. Now the fact that we've actually already bothered to put the stickers onto these things, that's usually an indication that this is something that we like. Now the Fat Shark goggles that these are most closely aligned to are actually these Fat Shark goggles here. Now these are the Fat Shark Dominator V3s. These are 16:9 wide aspect ratio. They have IPD adjustment, which both of them have. They also have inbuilt DVR. They have the ability to move around bits and pieces as well, and these are very, very similar in spec to these, but with a couple of notable differences. So before we get into the specs for this thing, let me just show you where we got these from. These are from gearbest.com. I'll put a link in the description if you want to go and have a look at them. But one of the things that you'll notice is the price of these. Now these are about £315, or they were when I took the screenshots on the site. So these are not low-end, cheap and cheerful entry-level goggles. AOMWAY is definitely aiming these squarely at the lower end of the more prosumer professional pilot. Now if we compare that with something like the Fat Shark goggles that we've just looked at, those are the Dominator V3s, then those are only about another £50. So we are very, very close to Fat Shark money with these AOMWAYs. So what do they have, and why would you choose these over something like a Fat Shark? So let's talk about the actual specs. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to take the antennas off here just because they are waving in front of the camera. It's probably not going to help with things like focus. Now both these antennas actually come in the kit. We'll show you what else comes in the box in a minute. I am a little disappointed that unfortunately AOMWAY didn't put one of their normal circular polarized antennas in here that we like so much. We've looked at these antennas before and they're really, really good. It's very confusing to me why, if they're going to go to the trouble of putting one of their little patch antennas on here, that they didn't bother putting one of those cloverleaf circular polarized numbers in as well. Because let's be honest, that is really neither use nor ornament. So let me put that to the side. So let's talk about the specs. All of this information is on the website and all the listings for these things in the various places that you can buy them. So it is very similar to some of the high-end goggles that you've got. You've got one little display behind each of these sets of optics here in the goggles. There's IPD adjustment, which is fantastic. That just moves the lenses inside so that you can actually focus on the screen. For me, just like with Fat Sharks actually, I need the IPD right in the middle, and then I can see exactly what I'm looking at. The resolution of the screens are in here are 854 by 480, so it's kind of a WVGA display, about a 32-degree field of view, which is very comfortable. It has inbuilt diversity, and it does appear to work very well. We'll look at the on-screen display in a minute, but there's no on-screen display information about things like which antenna is being used and RSSI level, which is a bit of a shame. But it has these kind of SMA style connectors in here, so if you have the kind of antennas that we have lots of here, then they'll plug straight in. Has a HDMI in port, has a port for the head tracker. Now I haven't got the head tracker to work on this. I suspect it doesn't actually have one installed. You're supposed to press and turn it on. It does say it's optional in the listing, so I'm guessing it hasn't got one in, although I haven't been able to find one for sale as a separate thing yet. Also under here we have the intake for the fan. The fan on here is underneath. That seems to work reasonably well. It's very, very quiet when it's running, but in the flights that we've been doing I haven't had any fogging, so I'm guessing that means that it's actually working. It does support 2D and 3D modes as well, so if you want to see things in 3D with things like the NerdCam camera, and again that was a camera we looked at a while ago, that's something that you can have a look at when you're flying with these. It has a DVR function. The DVR, I do like the fact it's here at the top of the goggles and it's on a little recess, so you can absolutely get your fingernail in and out of there without having to go fishing around. In some of the goggles, it's a little bit out of the way, and particularly when you have things like the fan shroud in place, you have to kind of use a fingernail, or in the end we actually designed a little 3D printed part to be able to remove the thing. Having it here is really handy. Full 40 channels of race band available here, so you should be able to find whatever you want, and also has some really cute functions like auto scan. So whereas some of the goggles, the higher end goggles that I've been playing with, hasn't got that kind of functionality, there's a nice little auto scan feature, so if you're not sure exactly what your model is transmitting on, and occasionally you have that when you have a new VTX that you're not sure about, then this will get that sorted for you. Other thing I'll mention is the battery connector. Now the battery connector itself is here at the side, and it's the very standard kind of barrel connector that we have on lots and lots of goggles, from Quantum, Fat Shark, you name it. But the way the lead works, the lead actually comes into this little connector here, which has the different balance taps. That means that you can pretty much use any battery that you want here at the back of your goggles, 2S, 3S, or even 4S if you wanted to, and you can plug that in and these little guys will power up. It's a nice touch. I do recommend that you put a bit of Velcro underneath this strap, because little batteries will slide out as you're moving around, because there's nothing inside this strap here that holds the battery in place. There's none of that kind of like, you know, dead plastic stuff that tends to grab on to stop things slipping. So now we've talked about that, let me talk about what else you get in the box. So you don't get a battery at all, you're going to have to supply your own, but as it runs with pretty much everything, that shouldn't be a problem. You get the two antennas that we've already looked at. You get one of the patch antennas that seems to work okay, and you get one of these little dipole things. Get rid of that, I'd just get yourself a proper antenna that's actually going to be useful. It comes in a really nice case to carry it around in. Actually, it's like the kind of things that you get with Oakley glasses, and it fits in here beautifully. You can kind of get your battery in here as well, and that means that it's very safe to transport and carry around in the bag, and it is a really nice fit. So that's a positive. The other things that you get in the box then, so this is how the box actually arrives, is you get the manual, talk about that in a second, and you get some cables and an extra set of eyepiece things, and that's about it. Now let's talk about the cables first of all. This is a standard input-output cable for AV, so it has your video and it has your left and right audio. If you want to use these to view a source from a ground station, then this is how you would connect it. You can disable the onboard FPV receiver, and then you'll be able to see the input image. If the AV receiver is already working, then the port on these goggles actually sends the video out, so you could connect a auxiliary screen or even a little set of ride-along goggles if somebody else wanted to watch what you were doing. You have another set of foam to go around the eyes. They're not the same though, be careful. These ones are a lot thicker. I'm actually trying the thin foam again. This is the foam that comes with it pre-installed. It actually just connects onto a Velcro sticky pad, so if you want to swap it, it's pretty easy. I think actually I'm going to go back to the thicker set. It seems to fit my face a little nicer, and the reason for that is the cutout on the nose. In fact, let me just bring the Fat Sharks in for comparison for this. The cutout from the nose and AOMWAYs is a lot less severe than on the Fat Sharks. And for those of you that have watched my channel for a while, you'll heard me talk about the fact that, you know, to get my bridge of my nose into the goggles, then if it's too shallow they don't fit. And these AOMWAYs do suffer from that a little bit. So these are obviously made for those people with a slightly less pronounced bridge to the nose, but with the slightly thicker foam it does space your face further away, and it does mean that the your nose isn't rubbing on that little bit, so that's a nice thing. The manual itself is a bit meh, to be honest. And does go through this, talk about the fact that it does support the lens inserts, so if you have the diopter lenses from things like Fat Shark, it'll actually fit in these goggles, which is fantastic. Shows you how to use all the pieces, the cables that you need if you want to use the head tracker, that's optional. And this is the bit that I think could probably do with a bit of rewriting. It's a bit complicated about what button does which piece. Now you can work it out, and it isn't actually too tricky once you start to play with it. You can very quickly get to the point where you can control the channel up or down. This button over here actually runs the mini fan for about 10 minutes at a time, so each press is about 10 minutes. If you long press it, it turns the head tracker on. It's kind of all in here, but one of the things I have found is the controls are not as intuitive as I would like, and there isn't any labeling or anything on the top to try and give me a chance to figure out what's actually going on. The other thing I've noticed about these is there isn't a USB port at all. Now we've got our AV in and out, we've got our headphone jack, our DVR port, our head tracker port, but one of the things we haven't got is a USB port. And what that means is that we're probably not going to be able to easily update this with new firmware as AOMWAY change and update things. And I think USB ports on goggles are a pretty essential thing these days. Most of the things on the hobby now actually have a USB port, and that allows us as pilots and operators to update and change things as the manufacturer addresses bugs and hiccups in the firmware and software that's running on them. So now we've talked about that, let me just connect this up to a source. We'll show you what it looks like in the goggles, and then I'll show you what the recordings look like on the DVR for both PAL and NTSC, because some of the problems we've had with DVRs in the past is particularly the cheap and cheerful ones tend to cut off the bottom handful of lines in a PAL image, and if you're relying on capturing OSD information on that bottom row of the display, you lose it. So let me just power these up, we'll come back and have a look. And the good news is the DVR actually works really well. It's not cutting off the bottom of the screen at all. We're actually using one of those Eachine 1000 TVL line cameras that have the little switch on the back that lets you change between PAL and NTSC. So I didn't have to move the camera at all. All I did was had a couple of post-it notes with the different modes written on, and there it is on the screen. You can see that the distortion that you sometimes get isn't there. However, point to note, the resolution that the recording is made in here is 640 by 480, so this is the aspect ratio natively that the DVR is recording in. So the wide aspect ratio that you get in the goggles isn't reflected in the DVR. The actual panels and lenses themselves are really bright and clear, and with a little bit of adjustment on the IPD you can get a nice crisp image all the way round. Now what I've done here is just put this camera right into the eye cup, so hopefully you can kind of get an idea of what the screen actually looks like. So in summary, what do I think? Well, these are very nice goggles, but they should be. They're the best part of £320. They are lightweight. They're about 50 grams lighter, excluding the battery, than something like the Fat Sharks. So they're very, very comfortable on your face. I'm guessing there is the minimum amount of plastics in here. The lenses are probably plastic too, and it does make for a very comfortable set of goggles, particularly when you use the slightly thicker foam. The inbuilt DVR works very well. The menu is very similar to lots of other little DVRs that we've looked at. I'm guessing it's pretty standard firmware that everyone seems to use. The IPD adjustment is very welcome, particularly for people like me who in the older style of goggles that didn't have them could struggle to get the focus on both images at the same time. The on-screen display appears in the top left-hand corner of the screen and is only there when you need it. So as you're pressing a button to either change the band or the channel or adjust the brightness or the contrast or whatever it is, it's there in the top left-hand corner, and after a couple of seconds it disappears, which is perfect. The record icon appears in the top right hand corner, and then if you press that button again for 3 seconds, then it starts to flash and recording. There's no external LEDs, which actually I'm not bothered about, to be honest, because I tend to be doing the recording while I've actually got the goggles close to my face anyway, so I can see when that's happening. It can be a little bit distracting, and you do have to think a little bit about where the on-screen display information from your craft is set up. But a nice touch is that you can set the DVR to start recording automatically. So as soon as you power them on, they start recording, which is great, because occasionally in the excitement of getting in the air, I do forget to hit that record button on other goggles. Nice idea to allow you to simply connect other batteries up here. So if you have any batteries in the pack with any power at all, 2, 3 or 4S, you can snap them on the back and use them to fly. The auto scan function's nice, the case is lovely, and it comes with the antennas, which is a nice touch. An awful lot of these goggles don't, or they come with the polarized ones. Just wish that AOMWAY had put one of their more conventional antennas in here, the circular polarized ones that we love so much. It just seems crazy to have a really nice set of goggles like this without putting one of your cheap and cheerful antennas that everyone already likes anyway. A couple of things that I'll draw your attention to. The price, it is getting towards fat sharp money. When I first saw these, I was hoping it would be £60–70 less, and then it would be a bit of a no-brainer for these. You have to remember though with Fat Sharks is that they also require some kind of receiver on top of the price. So it isn't just the price we looked at, there's also an additional 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds, or potentially even a little bit more if you're going to use one of the more expensive diversity setups, things like LaForges, etc. So the price difference between these and something like that is actually a little bit bigger. But I think there are going to be a number of pilots that will look at these and think, well, actually, you know what, for an extra 30, 40 quid, I can probably get the Fat Sharks. The controls are not as intuitive as they need to be. I wish there had been some kind of printing on the actual goggles themselves to help you figure it out or remember it. Once I've been using them for 20 minutes, it kind of all comes back to me and I can figure it all out. But having some more sensible layouts in terms of the way it's all done would be better. And also doing things like doing the playback on the DVR automatically disables the RF in, which you have to do manually. Things like that would have been nice touches that I would have hoped to see on goggles like this. There is a ton of diversity information in the RSSI. They've gone to the trouble of putting that in there, but I personally would have liked to have seen the signal strength and also the antenna port that I'm using, just to know when I'm starting to push to the edge of my range. Disappointed there isn't a USB connection. I would have loved a USB connection to allow me to connect up to some kind of graphical user interface or software to do firmware updates, to change the settings. I think these days not having a USB port on these things is a bit of an oversight, as software and updates are changing so regularly. And for me, it's not a big problem, but you cannot switch it between 16:9 widescreen mode, which is the default, and 4:3 mode if you're using that style of camera. A lot of other goggles that are on the market now that we've looked at recently allow you to change the aspect ratio. And for those pilots that aren't using widescreen cameras all the time, and I would recommend those of you who haven't tried something like the Runcam Eagle or the 960 cameras from Fat Shark that have the 16:9 aspect ratio, if you have widescreen goggles, try those cameras. It looks amazing. But for those of us that are also running 4:3 cameras, HS1177s, the other Runcams, things like that, then it's going to appear stretched in the goggles. Very last thing I'll talk about is the fact that this is inbuilt diversity. We've already talked about how cool that is. There's no setting up required. You don't have to mess about. You already get a patch antenna in the kit. If you plug it in with another circular polarized antenna, then it will give you a great starter setup for diversity. It does mean though that if you are the kind of pilot that likes to tinker and have been watching all the things on the LaForge and all the different types of 5808 based diversity receivers available for things like Fat Shark goggles and others, then you cannot change it easily on here. And because we don't have that USB cable, we're not going to be able to update the firmware as well. So if you are a tinkerer and you like changing things and you like the option to maybe in the future try different FPV frequencies, if it's allowed in your country, then these goggles maybe aren't for you. But if you want that simplicity of being able to have diversity out the box, then these are definitely worth a look. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. We try and release at least 2 videos a week, usually a quick tip on a Tuesday and a more in-depth video on a Friday, and sometimes we manage to get a few more out as well. If you're interested in radio control, then the playlists are useful to have a look at. Anything that's called Introduction To is an organised set of videos that teach you from first principles about the subject that you're interested in. But we also have information about the majority of popular open source flight controllers, how to build quadcopters, fixed wing models, reviews, setups, unboxing, all kinds of things in here as well. So if you haven't already had a look at the playlist, then I'd recommend going and have a look through here to see if there's anything that takes your fancy. Finally, we do also provide updates through things like Twitter, Instagram, and also post all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse as well. So if you like what we're doing here on YouTube, have a look at those things and subscribe to us there, and you'll find out what we're up to in advance of the videos coming out here on the channel.